Good evening, I'm Edel Howlin.
And I'm Sarah McCammon.
We welcome you to our pre-inauguration conversation where in-studio guests address the President-elect Donald Trump and explain what they'd like him to know about them or their community.
This is a live web stream broadcast from the Geary Studio at Houston Public Media in conjunction with A Nation Engaged, an initiative from NPR that's looking to spark conversation that matters. Similar conversations are happening right now at public radio stations in North Carolina, Sacramento, and Wisconsin.
You can take part in this conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag #ANationEngagedHU, that's HOU, and a reminder that this web stream is also part of our year-long DiverseCity initiative, which aims to explore the impact and meaning behind Houston being the most diverse city in the nation.
And speaking of diversity, we've got an incredibly diverse group in the room here tonight to express their thoughts and feelings as Donald Trump takes his oath of office to be the 45th president of the United States. So let's go around the room and introduce our panel. We'll start with Grace Rodriguez, co-founder and culture coordinator for Station Houston, a startup community.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cesar Espinoza, executive director of an immigrant rights organization named FIEL.
Thank you for having us.
Heba Khan, staff editor at the Journal of Feminist Economics at Rice University.
Thank you for having me.
Kaleb Taylor, a student at TSU and an activist.
Thanks for having me.
We have John Cobarruvias, a former NASA engineer and consumer advocate.
Thanks for the invite.
Thony Ngumbu is a U.S. Army veteran originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, now with Genesis Ventures, a Houston-based impact investing firm.
And we have Natalie Arceneaux, who's a business consultant and conservative talk show host.
Thank you.
We have Martha Wong, a former Houston City Council member and state legislator. We have Dr. Laura Murillo, president of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you.
Johali Muzaliwa is an attorney for the Jurek Law Group. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
And Vlad Davidiuk is a conservative writer and political analyst. Welcome,
good
Vlad.
evening.
And MJ Khan is a former Houston City Council member and president of the Islamic Society of Greater Houston. Welcome, MJ.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate you guys taking the time.
So without further ado, let's kick off with Johali. What would you like the president-elect to know about you or your community?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I'm glad to be here. I think what I would like the president to know is that I, as an immigrant, come from parents who came to the United States seeking a better life for their kids and sacrificed a lot to obtain that. And I would like for him to know that we are hardworking Americans who are just seeking a better life as every American in this country is seeking as well. So that's what I would like him to know.
John, what would you like to
Well, as a Hispanic, I'm not an immigrant. I was born here. Unfortunately, some of the things that have been said over the past year, the people who have heard this are actually directing their anger toward illegal immigration at me, and because of my skin color. And this has happened to me just a few weeks ago where some people pulled up next to me and yelled, "Build the wall." And it took me a few minutes to understand, why did they say that to me? And the tone of this, the tone of our president-elect is not right for the president. And I think he needs to change that.
Martha?
Well, I have served on a Trump Asian Advisory Committee, so I think he knows a great deal about the Asian community through the advisory committee. But I would like for him to be aware that the Asian community is a very diverse community in itself. So it includes everything from the Chinese over to the Pacific Islanders. So it's a very diverse, and I'd say there's probably like 27 different ethnicities within the Asian community. Yet, although they are very diverse, I think the values in the Asian community are very similar. And I think that Asians always seem to put family first. That's something I've been taught from the very young, that you do nothing that would disgrace your family, that you're always going to help your family regardless. And then I think, as everyone else knows, that education is also a very high priority in the Asian community. Many people move into certain neighborhoods just so that their children can go to the right school. And so that's a high priority among the Asian community. I think the other thing that we have very similar with many other communities is the desire to profit and to grow economically. And many Asians, as many other ethnic groups, form their own companies. And they do that because in many instances they do not survive well in the corporate world. And because they don't survive well in the corporate world, they go and open their own companies. So Asians are very entrepreneurial, as I think many minority groups are.
Dr. Murillo, you're a business owner, is that correct? Or a business?
I'm president and CEO of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. That is my full-time occupation. I also am the executive producer and host for our television program on CBS Radio and Television and Univision Radio and Television.
What are you hearing from business leaders in your community?
Well, certainly very divided. I just returned last night, as a matter of fact, from a private meeting with Mr. Trump's transition team, and it was a very interesting conversation. It was all national organizations with the exception of the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And so it was a good opportunity, number one, to be at the table with his transition team, especially given the fact that here locally, the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has been a very loud voice and has differed on many of the topics that have been brought up by his administration. And the key thing we wanted them to take away was the fact that we are not pleased with the commentary we've heard about Hispanics, women, and other groups, and that in fact we hope that this is an opportunity to engage this community, and that in fact that we are part of America. We are part of this fabric and not just a thread. We are people who have built this country and will continue to do so. And so we said it with great passion, very loudly. And it is our hope that together we can move forward. And that is why we will be at the inauguration. We will be at continued conversations and at the table moving forward for the next 4 years.
I'm curious to hear, we do have a very diverse group here, and as I covered Donald Trump's campaign, I often heard him make the argument that his policies would be best for people of color, for, he said, I want to help everyone, and I don't know who wants to start, but I'm curious to hear many of you react to that, if you would.
Well, how do you believe that when he follows that up with you're rapists, you're murderers? Or how do you believe that when he says we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it, which they are not? How do you go about doing that? I have a hard time believing that.
Natalie?
So I'm a conservative, and I fundamentally believe that conservative values advance everybody, right? Not just minorities. I firmly believe that when you have a less intrusive government into your personal life, into your business life, economic opportunities are there for you to grow and for you to flourish. My concern is that I'm not sure if Donald Trump's rhetoric aligns with those very same conservative values that are for less regulation, for less smaller, less intrusive government. Because to date, he hasn't necessarily put out a plan that speaks to those ideals. Quite conversely, he's put out plans that grow government and that really are really invasive into personal and private spaces, right? So that's my concern. And as an African American, I really want him to know that we're not monolithic, right? So, I'm sitting in a room with other brown-skinned folks who could be considered African American or anything else, right? And that we have a very diverse set of values and beliefs, and that I really want him to focus on not just from the African American community, but from all communities in the United States, right? That we can somehow find some common ground that we can move from this tit for tat leadership style that he has, and I use air quotes with leadership style, and that he can hopefully find some cultural common ground to unite everybody around some very pressing issues that the United States is going to face moving forward around jobs and around education and around security and, even our foreign policy. And it's to me, it's not a black and white issue or a Hispanic issue. It's very much an American issue, and we somehow have to find some common ground there. And the finger pointing and name calling and the steady decline of civil political discourse that is supposed to exist in order to champion ideas and to make sure that the right ideas are on the table and have the right amount of challenge in order to get the best product. That's what we need. And I hope that he has an awakening that will stimulate that in his administration.
And so, if I can just jump up on that, Sarah, you talked about policy-wise, how can we, or what's our thoughts on the lives of immigrants becoming better with Donald Trump's policy? Well, on the policy standpoint, he's a little thin. We haven't heard any policy yet to this point. So the only way to really judge would be on rhetoric, and unfortunately, the rhetoric has been very toxic to this point. As some of my fellow panelists here mentioned, the rhetoric has been very toxic, and the one thing we know is that Donald Trump wants to make America great again. So that's something that seems to be the prevailing tenet. But in making that argument, as I mentioned, there's a lot of toxic rhetoric that was spewed left and right. So before even moving on to the just policy analysis, I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen first of all. Because there's a lot of anxiety that was felt amongst many different immigrant communities out there. I myself, for example, as an immigrant from the Democratic Republic of Congo and the African diaspora in general, I can tell you that there is really a lot of just anxiousness out there, people being unsure what this administration's standpoint will be towards immigrants. So healing, I think, will be key, and it's important to do that, considering that now that President Trump will transition from being candidate Trump to President Trump, he has to be the president of all Americans, including immigrants that are in this country that are helping, to advance the greatness of this country, immigrants that have been working very hard in this country, immigrants that are not a threat to this greatness that he's trying to implement.
Immigration has... Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, to start off with, I have an issue with Make America Great Again. We make America great already. Latinos, African Americans, the LGBT community, many people working every single day to provide for themselves and their families already make America great. And so going back to the original question is, what would I like for him to know? Is for him to know us. Like a lot of people, when they talk about immigration or things like that, they're like, if we legalize 11 million undocumented people, we're going to legalize 11 million Democrats. And my first thought to that reaction is, you have not met our community if you make that statement. I mean, we talk to a lot of people who are very fiscally conservative, who share a lot of the values that both the Republican and Democratic Party hold, and to make general assumptions like that is hurt. Unfortunately, the damage has been done already. I mean, we see it and we feel it, and I am a semi-documented person, which means that I have a work permit, and in 11 days from today, I could go back to being fully undocumented. And I'm not afraid, but there's a lot of people in my community that are, because they don't know what is going to happen to themselves and their families. So it's a really scary feeling, because there are no policies, there are no black and white. It's just I don't know. And that's for a person living here who has lived their whole life here, who has roots here, who has bought homes, who has bought cars, who has started business, that's a very, very scary thing to face.
Cesar, I think you make a very good point that it is, in fact, about people, individuals and families who are in this country, like yourself, that really are going to be impacted by policy that may change the trajectory of their careers and their lives and the contributions they've made to this country. So it's not a joking matter. It is a very serious matter that will impact millions of immigrants who have worked hard to have a place in this country. And we should be at the table, each of us advocating advocating to make sure that there are policies to protect these individuals and that we move forward and heal. As you mentioned, there's a lot of healing that needs to be done.
Vlad, I'd love to bring you in on this, but right after MJ, sorry, go ahead.
I'm a first-generation immigrant, a Muslim from Pakistan, but I've lived more of my life here in 40 years than in Pakistan. The Muslim community right now is very anxious because of the political discourse we have seen. What I would like to say to Mr. Trump, first of all, I want to congratulate him. We have to respect the office of the presidency. He is our president. We will do everything possible to make him succeed and make him look good. Muslims have a very long history in this country of contributing to making America great. Every generation, whether you look at hundreds of years before or today, that every generation of America has tried to make America great again and have succeeded in a great deal. But right now, the political discourse in this country, because of the political rhetoric, is such that Muslim women are afraid whether they should go in covering their head or not. Muslim men are concerned whether they should go with a beard or not. Is my mosque going to be surveilled? Am I going to be a part of some FBI surveillance? Will there be any special registration for Muslims? And that's a real anxiety. And what I would like to say to Mr. Trump, leadership means that you bring the people together. Leadership means that every member of the society should feel that they have a stake in this society and they're respected equally just like everybody else. So we have a lot to wait and see about his policy. Some of his appointments, if you look at some of his appointments, the conversation which some of those people have done is really part of the anxiety of the Muslim community, because they are saying that are they going to, the previous two presidents, Barack Obama and George W. Bush, okay, they both were from different parties. They never declared war on Islam. They always were war against terrorism. Now what we heard, the rhetoric and some of the nominees, is there is a concern that it may be, and what they understand, the American Muslim community is the best vehicle they have to counter extremism and build relationship in the Muslim world. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world, and the world will be better off if there's a better relationship between Muslims around the world and America and the West.
Well, I'd like to say that I don't think that all of us are aware that Mr. Trump has really reached out to different groups. I know that there is a Hispanic group that he has formed that he has reached out to, and he is visiting and working with them. Same with the Muslims, with the Asians, with the Black Americans. So there are groups that he has formed, that he has reached out to. And I think Mr. Trump is one of the first Republicans that have ever gone into some of the Black churches, whereas many of them in the Republicans in the past have never done that. So he has reached out. There are groups that are there that he is working with. So I would like to let you know that is happening, and he is getting advice from different ethnic groups that are trying to help him to understand.
Yeah, well, and my thing is about the Black community and the churches, right? So let's be clear. Every politician comes to the Black church. Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. Election time, there's a parade of politicians in the Black church trying to woo somebody. So I don't think he's the first to appear as a Republican in a Black church. The other thing is, I don't necessarily think that this is about him forming advisory committees, right? That's fantastic that you have a bunch of people advising you. If you're unwilling to listen to the advice, then we have a problem. So this, to me, is less about formulating advisory committees and more about his own ideals that he holds and how he's going to articulate that. And that's not from an advisory committee position. That's from something that's in your heart that you hold dearly, right? So he should be, as a leader, right, I would expect him to tamp down the rhetoric, right, of anybody who is actively or aggressively their rhetoric is turned up against Muslims, is turned up against immigrants, is turned up against Hispanics, is turned up against Blacks, right? All these populations where we see this increased aggressive rhetoric, I would expect him as a leader to curtail his own supporters and his own administration and say that's not how we're going to proceed. That we're not doing it that way. That's not how we're and we don't. And no one hears that yet. No one hears the kind of the swift kick to say, okay, that's great. That was campaign rhetoric, right? Even if he just wants to say, you know what, I ran on that. That was my campaign. I got elected. Fantastic. Now this is how we're going to do business moving forward. That hasn't come yet, and I think that's why a lot of people are concerned, because that's what they're looking for.
I would also add, Natalie, that with people, you need to watch what they do and not pay so much attention to what they say. And thus far, we need to pay attention to what is being done, and whether there are communications with individuals or groups or not, let's just talk about what's being done. And there's a lot in limbo. The man has not entered office yet. Let's make sure that he hears us, and let's pay attention to what someone does. And so far, for minorities and for women and for many of us, there's a lot of concern.
And I must tell you, he may have met some Muslims. There are over 500 Muslim leaders who signed a letter right after his election congratulating him and sharing that they are willing to work with him and all the good things. His administration has not reached out to any Muslim leadership all across the country. Like Hispanic leaders he met, the transition he met yesterday, regardless of what party you belong to. There has never been any effort by anybody in his transition team or close to him to reach out to the Muslim leadership. Yeah, he may have some Muslims who he may have met, but we are talking about the people who matter, people who represent the communities, people who are there to understand what's going on and explain to them as to what will it take for the Muslim community to feel part and parcel of this administration, just like we have been in the past. And, look, I'm basically an optimistic person. These things have happened in the past in America. The pendulum will swing back. But we have to understand that legacy of leaders will be remembered by the history, just like we remember the Japanese who were put in internment camps, just like we remember the Jim Crow laws. These are the legacy which will be long-lasting, and Mr. Trump and his advisor will be better off in treating everybody with same respect, equal respect, and giving opportunity to everybody to part and parcel of making America great again.
Well, I want to agree with what Mr. Khan and Ms. Wong and Natalie have all said. And Martha, you made a very good point that the Trump transition team has made some efforts to get to know some communities and bring some advisors in. And yeah, his campaign motto was "Make America Great Again," and part of that is campaign rhetoric. But at the same time, what I hope he takes away from that is the understanding that what made America great, which is what Dennis Prager refers to as the American Trinity, which is the "In God We Trust, E Pluribus Unum," and liberty. All those things coincide and work together. So to go with what you were saying, Mr. Khan, to bring all these groups together in E Pluribus Unum, out of many make one, it's very functional of not only the democracy that we live in, but it's actually important to the republic that we live in, that these communities that seem separate actually work together and a common purpose.
I want to come back to that thought in just one second, but first I want to remind those viewers who are watching online that you're watching a live pre-inauguration web stream broadcast from the Geary Studio at Houston Public Media in conjunction with A Nation Engaged, an initiative from NPR that is looking to spark conversations that matter. And I do want to come back to that idea of diversity, Vlad, that you raised, and also Natalie, you talked about, you've identified as a conservative and as an African American, and the need I think I heard you express for Trump to be more inclusive, to shift his rhetoric in a way that feels more inclusive to people of color, to immigrants, et cetera. But the thing that I'm curious about is heading into the 2016 election cycle, if we can back up a little bit. You may all remember that the conventional wisdom for the Republican Party was that based on their performance in 2012, they were going to need to reach out to more diverse communities, reach out to diverse voters, moderate on immigration. And yet Trump ran on took a very different approach and won. And I'm wondering what that says for those of you who are conservative about the state of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and also more broadly about where our nation's at.
I'd like to actually take that because I've actually thought a lot about this. I would argue that Trump is really a sui generis kind of thing. He's a one-off, one-shot wonder kind of thing. The Republican Party faced its most awesome opportunity and its most glaring challenge in the 2016 primary and election, because you had, at the one hand, you had an opportunity to return the White House to Republican hands. And for the most part, I think it was conventional wisdom that it was almost a given that if the Republicans nominated a conventional Republican who could appeal to the different factions within the Republican Party, it was likely not only that that candidate would win the nomination, but that candidate would probably become president. And so what wound up happening is everybody knows that more likely than not, whoever's the Republican nominee is going to become president. So that's why you get 17 people jumping into the race to compete for a spot in which I think maybe 13, 14 of them are completely unqualified for. At one point, I completely forgot Jim Gilmore was even in there. But what happened is the typical Republican playbook is to appeal to a certain base, reach out a little bit to some of the moderate groups, and then use that to build the cushion. Following the 2012 election, the GOP engaged in what's called the autopsy report, which basically said we have to reach out to these other groups, women, Hispanics, millennials, LGBT.
Doesn't sound like they did any of it.
Well, here's the thing. They did, but it was spread out over 17 different candidates. It wasn't focused from the RNC. At the same time, what we had the Democrat Party nominate the most disliked, dishonest, fundamentally unwanted candidate ever. And so what happened is you had these candidates who were competing, who were on both sides, completely disliked on the left and on the right, competing for the same job, and nobody wants either one of them. If you look at the numbers for how Barack Obama did, in about 700 counties in America in which voted for Barack Obama twice in 2008 and 2012, Donald Trump won 209 of them. That means that those counties did not become suddenly racist from 2012 into 2016. They looked at the candidates and they said, that woman does not represent me. I'm going to go in a different direction. And so what happened is, you had the GOP basically abandoning what they thought they were going to do in 2016. But out of necessity, turned to another candidate, turned to another method of winning the election because the opportunity presented didn't match up with what the preconceived notion was going to be. It's not that Donald Trump won the election in 2016. Hillary Clinton lost the election in 2016.
And I would actually argue from a different perspective. I would argue that Donald Trump as the candidate for the Republican Party and ultimately our now president-elect, having won, is a result of the failure of the GOP to reach out, right? I think that the GOP failed to build a bigger tent, and had they put in the work, and when I say failed to build a bigger tent, I don't mean, again, the parade of people who show up at church, and I don't mean the few attempts that you make disingenuously to make bikes for kids, right? That's not engaging with a community, right? So you have to show up and be there and be in that community's issues and understand the things that affect that neighborhood, that community, those people, whoever they are. And as the GOP failed to do that, and therefore their base as a whole is shrinking, right? Because old white men are going away, right? Old people in general, right? Sure. As you get older and older, there's a natural attrition that happens.
And that's was the attraction by Bernie Sanders,
right? Exactly. And so and for me, that's what elevated a Trump. The fact that the GOP failed after years and years and years of people like me and people like Vlad and other people saying, "Hey, we really need to do something to reach out to these people." And when I founded a Tea Party along with some other people, and folks would show up, and they would be so enamored by the fact that there's a black girl in the Republican Party. And I'm like, this is not how we get more black people by being in awe and staring like I'm in the zoo.
Well,
That's
I think
not how we're going to get more black people,
earlier
right?
Is that even among Latinos, and Martha made it also, even among Asians, there are very many people aligned with conservative family values, et cetera. It's the antics and the tactics and the rhetoric of insulting and being disrespectful to individuals and entire communities, which I think has separated
Well,
us.
and just not showing up for that community's issues,
can I
right?
stop?
Just not. I mean, I can't think of how many times something significant has happened. Let's look at the shooting in Orlando, right? So there was a shooting in Orlando that affected, the Pulse nightclub shooting, and if no quote unquote GOP leader showed up on the ground there.
Okay. All right. So wait, can we just pause for a second? We just want to bring Grace in here on this.
When we're talking about how Trump won, I think there's something much more complex at play because he lost the popular vote. 2.8 million more people voted for the opposite candidate, right? But he won because those people were not based in the center of America, right? So the opportunities that the coasts pose, a lot of people who are educated, who are affluent, are moving to those coasts, which leave the margins of how people are winning the electoral votes for the central part of the country open. They flip very easily. I wanted to say, to answer the first question, so I'm an Asian American woman who co-founded a startup tech hub in the most diverse city in the country. So my community is very diverse. And since 2012, almost half of all startups with VC backing have been based in the middle part of the country, the places that Trump carried. Outside of California, Massachusetts, and New York, which we normally think of as that's where all of the startup companies are going to be. Station Houston is actually a really good example of that. In this city, within the past 8 months, our member companies have raised over $30 million. They're all startup companies. And our startup founders come from France, Belgium, Germany, South Asia, the Middle East, East Asia. It's a very diverse community. I wanted to go through some of the data. About a third of U.S. venture-backed companies that went public within the past 10 years have more than one immigrant founder. Over half of U.S. startups valued at over $1 billion are started by immigrants. Like when you were talking about the inclusion, right, and this common ground, I feel like a path to productivity is really important. We talk about diversity, but we don't talk enough about how do we include more people. And when we're looking at the cabinet, how is he including people at leadership positions, not just taking on advisors, but making sure those people have a seat at the table, because that's what changes things. When you have people who have diverse opinions, diverse backgrounds, diverse expertise at the table making the decisions, not just advising the decisions. I posed this question to people in my communities on Facebook and asked what they would like the president-elect to know. And they said healthcare is really important to them. They're all the majority of people who answered are founders of their own companies, and they wanted to make sure that they can provide healthcare for their employees. They also wanted to make sure that he's aware that we live in a global economy, right? And so a lot of the companies that are developing hardware startups, they're importing from other companies. So if you raise those taxes, that negatively impacts how they're able to compete with larger companies. So don't forget about the startups. Make sure that we are incentivizing and rewarding innovation, not just these larger corporations.
So Grace, we've heard from your community and hearing what you kind of, Vlad and Natalie, are talking about when it comes to sort of how you felt the candidates did or didn't speak to you. One of the voices we haven't heard in this room is Kaleb. And I'm curious to know, sort of, as you represent like that younger generation of millennials who are going to be, heading out into the workforce soon. Like, how did you feel the candidates kind of spoke to you, and what is your take on President-elect Trump as he takes office?
Right. So as a young African-American college student, I've been born and raised here in Houston, the most diverse city in the nation. I've never known a classroom that wasn't diverse. Since I've been in my collegiate career, every classroom that I've been in has had at least one international student. And so what I would like to see President Trump, what I would like him to see from my perspective is just what has taken up the majority of the conversation, that there's beauty in diversity, and having diverse opinions, having people from diverse backgrounds, allowing them to have a seat at the table only makes our nation stronger. And then as a young African-American student, I've been heavily involved in community activism, Black Lives Matter, just dealing with police community relations. I would like President Trump to know that, we as African Americans are not looking for handouts, or we're not looking for special treatment. We're just looking for equality. We're just looking for a level playing field. Slavery, Jim Crow, these are things that are not very far removed from this nation's history, and they still impact African American communities and people of color on a daily basis. And so I would, like him to understand that. Going back to dealing with police community relations, I believe in the second debate, when the question was asked how he would deal with that, he said that he wanted to implement stop and frisk policies on a national level. This is a policy that has been ruled as unconstitutional in New York. And so I would like him to seek to understand where people are coming from and essentially just be the president of all of America and not, appeal to the base that elected him.
I'd like to follow up to that and all the other points that have been made, especially about outreach. I think from the American Muslim community, and people have already mentioned this, I think the outreach is really problematic in terms of inclusion and the rhetoric, especially because the rhetoric that goes along with being included and accepted is, well, you're a good Muslim this way, or a good Muslim informant this way, or you're a good, American Muslim woman if you look like this, but we're going to think you're oppressed or whatnot if you look like that. And I think that all has been really wounding and painful for the diverse community that is actually like people have mentioned, the American Muslim community in this city and in this country. So I would like the president to know that and to actually reach out to those communities in a meaningful and productive way instead of sort of presupposing what's expected from them and how they're supposed to be.
Look, one of the easiest way is to divide the community, divide and rule kind of thing. Yeah. It doesn't work. It will not work in 2017 if you box people in certain ways and we're going to have a stop and frisk type of policy. That may appeal to some people and that may feel good. Some people may feel good about that, but that will really divide the large segment of the community and put them in anxiety and fear. And that's the whole point I think we are all trying to make to President-elect Trump. Be the president of everybody. Rise above this rhetoric of campaigning. Now it is governance. And governance means that everybody should feel that they are respected. Muslim community is basically conservative community. Asian community is basically conservative community. And we are not looking for any kind of handouts from anybody. A Muslim community has the largest level of education, largest level of economic prosperity. What we are looking for is people to treat us with respect. And when you see some of the rhetoric, and it's not just rhetoric, now you see in the confirmation hearings also, yes. When people talk about how the Muslim community will be treated, how the war against terrorism will be, as if we are all guilty by association, and that's what is wrong with that discourse, and that needs to be changed if we want to really bring this society better to working together to make America great again.
So earlier,
I spoke as a Hispanic earlier. Let me speak as an American. If I was going to give him some suggestions, now some people think that I speak up a little bit too much and I'm a little bit blunt at times. And
that's why we invited you, John.
My suggestion is to get off of Twitter. You are the president of the United States of America, and you're the president of the United States of America. Act like one. And the other thing is that we have elected an individual who is basically the most unqualified individual in the history of our country to be a politician. He was running to be a politician. He's not one. So please, surround yourself with people who understand the issues and understand the cabinets that they're going to be controlling. And unfortunately, with those suggestions, and one more, you've won the election. You've won. Stop misleading us. Stop lying to us. You have won the election. Now, unfortunately, looking at who he has picked for his cabinet positions, he's not listening to us. And I feel there's a lot of people in this room who have a lot of confidence that one day he's going to make that pivot. We've been waiting for a year and a half. And quite frankly, 4 years from now, we're going to still be waiting. I don't have that confidence, and I'm very sorry because, quite frankly, I'm a little bit concerned about for this country.
Well, John, in the conversation in the private meeting yesterday with his transition team, the conversation was brought up that where are the women, where are the minorities, where are the Latinos? This will be the first time since the administration of Ronald Reagan that Latinos will not be in a cabinet position. How can you engage all of America and not have America at the table?
And what kind of reaction did you get to that?
They took lots of notes.
He tweeted.
And you brought up a really good point, which is there's a saying in Spanish that says, "Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres." Tell me who you hang out with, and I'll tell you who you are. And when you have him suggest a guy like Jeff Sessions, who supported HR 4437, which was a bill that would have made it illegal for any of you guys to be in the room. It would have made you guys felons just by me being here as an undocumented individual. When you have somebody, when you say Sessions is good for a cabinet position, when he pushed for that piece of legislation to move forward, along with many other bad policies that would dehumanize people, that would treat us like criminals, that would treat us like I don't like the term alien because I'm a human being, and who all I want to do is to be here and live the American dream. But when you have people like that put up for cabinet positions, it really, to me, it really tells me a lot about who you are. And some of these people have a very bad track record. I mean, horrible. At one point, he was vetting Joe Arpaio to be the Department of Homeland Security chair. Thank God that did not happen. He picked somebody that's a little bit better, but we have yet to see. But to me, that's a cause for concern, because even though he might not know what he's doing, he's certainly surrounding himself with people who have a very track record and who can make very damaging decisions for the United States of America. I'm
reminded, I'd like to borrow from President Obama, from his fantastic farewell speech yesterday. I think he brought up a line from Harper Lee's novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, right? When he talked about Atticus Finch talking to his daughter, Scout, saying, you never really understand somebody until you walk in his shoes or, consider something from their point of view. And I think that is a message that hopefully President Trump would understand. It is important from his position, which is the most powerful seat in the House, in the nation, if you will, a seat that has so much symbolic and real strength and power. It's a seat that can bring about so much change. From his position, he is the one who leads, quote unquote, the direction, right, of his administration. So it is important for him to, I think, tone down again the rhetoric. Now, the funny thing is, I don't think Donald Trump misunderstands immigrant. At least he shouldn't. His grandfather came from Germany, right? And he has a penchant for immigrants with women.
Every
Absolutely.
day run and managed and built by
immigrants. So I don't think he necessarily misunderstands, quite frankly, the issues of immigrants. We mentioned his wives, his current and former wives are all being immigrants, businesses. So he understands, in my opinion, what the challenges are of immigrants. But maybe it's one during the election campaign, wanting to cater to certain base, because after all, you were wanting to win the position. And then once he's won it, it's also now the people who is surrounding himself. That, I think, is a problem. So it would be important, in my opinion, if he himself, won't go, as Obama say, walk in the shoes of others, surround himself with people who maybe have a better understanding of what the real challenges are.
What kind of policies we're going to have? Because right after 9/11, there was a policy called NCR policy, which President George W. Bush put together, where 25 countries people were supposed to register. Only one was North Korea. Everybody else was Muslim country. Now, President Obama did away with that. And now there is a talk. So I can deal with the rhetoric, but it is the policy. Is he going to have this registration policy for Muslims, exclusive for Muslim be in place? And if that happens, hopefully the whole America will register as a Muslim to counter that. But we have to look at what kind of policies they put in place.
Just want to stop you for just 1 second and remind our viewers online that you're watching a live pre-inauguration web stream broadcast from the Geary Studio at Houston Public Media in conjunction with A Nation Engaged, an initiative initiative from NPR that's looking to spark conversation that matters.
We're asking folks in studio to basically respond to the question, what would they like the new president to know about them or their community as he takes office? You can join this conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag #ANationEngagedHugh. And I'm cognizant that everyone wants to weigh in, and we've been talking a lot about sort of, the inclusivity or not inclusivity and the rhetoric. And I would love to know, to sort of, I guess, turn it to maybe a little more positive, like, what are your hopes?
My hope is that Americans, born in this country or not, are more engaged than ever. Because we cannot just point the finger at an individual and say, this person is going to make America great again without us. And so we need to be more vocal and more engaged than ever before. And that is my hope, not only for Latinos in this country, but for all Americans.
And I would like to second that.
Yes.
Hang on. I'm going to pause you for a second. Johali, I know you've been trying to get in for a while there.
So I'm just going to go back to the question that was posed earlier, or what was being discussed as to how is it that Donald Trump won. And I know it was mentioned that he didn't include, diverse groups. But I actually think the reason that the Democrats lost was because they failed to include a very important group, which was working white Americans. So I think going forward, if we're talking about inclusivity, I think we tend to just think of immigrants, Black, white, Asians, Indians. But I think we need to include all Americans, and that includes white people as well, white working, Americans. I think in Obama's speech yesterday, he made the good point that, we can't just brush off people because, they're white, for instance. And if we are to walk into other people's shoes, we're expecting other people to walk into our shoes. I think it's also important for us to walk into everybody else's shoes. And if we're asking for Donald Trump to be an American of all people, and we want to be inclusive, and we want everybody to be included, I think that should mean everybody should be included.
And I'd like to come back to the engagement message that we mentioned. I think it's so important. Yes, we have a president who occupies the most powerful seat, but democracy is all about us. And I think President Obama pointed that as well yesterday. I think it is important going forward for Americans to really, really become more engaged. It's heartbreaking for me sometimes as an immigrant who came from a country where, you don't necessarily have the same opportunities to be engaged, to see how lackluster the, engagement is here. I mean, when I was looking at numbers in the last election, for example, I think it's something like 40% of the eligible electors did not even go to the polls, to vote, which is mesmerizing to me. But anyhow, I think engagement will be key so that we can hold our politicians accountable. On that note, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I think it was on January 2nd when the House Republicans attempted to pass, it would have been a bill to kind of change the Office of Congressional Ethics, the OCE, to remove its independent status so that it would become under control of the lawmakers themselves. Well, what ended up happening, there was such a massive outcry so that, people went to Twitter, people called the representative's office. And then once that movement started, I think Donald Trump also went back to the Twitter and they ended up changing. But that was a great, image of what could happen going forward if we hold our politicians accountable. And it is through that type of engagement that we can ensure that, this country doesn't veer off from what it's all about, from the values that have made it what it is. This country was founded on the principle of acceptance, of anybody seeking, whether it's freedom, opportunities. Those are founding values of this country, and we need to hold our politicians accountable to make sure it continues.
And, I mean, on the engagement, related to engagement, I guess, I don't necessarily have a problem with presidents leveraging social media, right? I think Twitter is a great way to connect. Facebook is a great way to connect. Instagram, all those things, right? I just want you to be more thoughtful when you engage on those platforms, right? Because your words set policy almost, right?
Meaningful
so what you
engagement.
say, it is. The other thing, so you asked about hopefulness. I am hopeful that what a Donald Trump presidency will bring to the United States is the ability for us to understand that we truly are an extremely diverse population across the country, and that diversity can't necessarily be met with cookie cutter federal mandates. That because we are so diverse, that people in California have different values and different priorities than people in Texas and Ohio and Wisconsin, that some of that power that the federal government has wielded for so long, people will wake up by themselves and say, you know what, I don't necessarily know if I need the federal government like this in my business. Why don't we let California figure this out for us? Why don't we let Maine figure this out for us, right? And so you will see some of the decentralization of federal government and returning some of the power back to the states, the city, your school boards, right? Your local, your mayors and your city councils. Those are the people who can really address the diversity that exists in your specific area. It's very hard for someone who is 2,000 miles away to govern 350 million people with varying views on any given thing, right? So that's my hope. My hope is that we return to a somewhat decentralized government where power isn't just focused at the federal level, and states and cities and counties begin to take back some of their power and really address their constituents' needs on the ground.
And I think that's a perfect opportunity, especially in a city such as Houston.
Yes.
In this city in particular, the Houston Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, our foundation, has raised over $2 million specifically to identify young professionals. We've encouraged them to run for office, get on those school boards. Politics, as they say, all politics are local. And so let's take ownership. And that is a hope for not only the city, but I believe, as Natalie said, for the country.
Trump has said he wants to do
Yeah.
with to allow the states to make more decisions rather than being made at the federal level. I think that's the same concept with the woman who's going to be the head of the Department of Education.
Betsy DeVos.
And so it's letting people decide, you as a parent decide what school is best for your child, not just because of where you live, that your child has to go to that school. So there are many things that I think some people have not picked up on that Donald Trump has said that some people are not listening to, because he has said that he does want to let the states make decisions about many things. The other things, he has already appointed 3 women in his cabinet. And of those 3 women, 2 of them are Asian. So he does have a diverse cabinet that he is working on, and there are also others that they aren't at cabinet level. That I believe that there's an Indian woman that is going to be over
United Nations.
So that he is looking at diversity. He is trying to be inclusive, and I think sometimes the rhetoric that goes on with the news is what you're hearing and not what he's hearing, and that's why he uses Twitter, because when he uses Twitter, it gets out there.
It varies from real actual news.
My hope is my faith in American people and American values. We have a history of overcoming all these hurdles and all these challenges. And I believe, regardless of which administration is in Washington, regardless of who is leading the departments, I think that American people will make this pendulum swing back to where every community, Muslim community will feel they are part and parcel, Asian community will feel they are part and parcel, Black community will feel that they are not subjected to Jim Crow's laws anymore and things of that nature. So my faith in American people and American values is what will make this society great, because America is unique. America is the greatest man-made experience we have in the history of the world. And we have to do our part to make sure not only we preserve that, but we spread it all over the world.
That brings me to a question I wanted to ask, kind of on this theme of hope, but I hear a lot of people talking about, coming together and hopefully, putting aside differences. This has been, though, a very divisive campaign that I think has brought out feelings that surprise some people. And I guess that's, sort of on the theme of hope. Where do you hope we go from here with that? How do we as as an America, a very diverse America, live together and move forward?
Well, first of all, if you look at political campaigns in the history, this is no different. Political campaigns are very brutal at times, and there have been worse experiences in political campaigns. So I understand that part. But I think that what is coming out of this rhetoric, I think people are more engaged. I see more young people being engaged in the political process now than I thought 10 years ago. So millennials are coming into picture. And I think that some of the things which both the parties are trying to do is get more people engaged and get involved.
But are we going to be able to talk
happens,
to each other, though, across differences?
Right,
That's
and
what I'm
I
getting
think
at.
I would go with what Obama said last night, which was, if you're getting into heated debates with people on social media, maybe you should actually just go and talk to that person face to face. And I just wanted to mention, after the election, there was a lot of bitterness in social media. And I would have people calling, people who voted for Trump racist, et cetera, et cetera. But, I know I had people who were my friends who voted for Trump. And I think it's a matter of giving somebody, the benefit of a doubt. If you know someone, just because they voted a certain way doesn't automatically make them a horrible person just because they voted for someone. So I think it's kind of like that understanding coming together and being like, you might have voted for this person who I think is absolutely horrible, but I know you as a person.
That's the opening. That's the opening to the conversation.
Right.
Where you think the other point of view outside of that context, it's completely unacceptable and is actually something that's antithetical to yourself. And you find someone that you actually trust, that you have an affinity with, who you consider to be a friend, and you find out they voted that way. You're like, that person is not a racist.
Right.
That person is not a bigot. That person is not a xenophobe. That means there's something I'm missing. There's something I don't understand about
Right,
this.
and you try to find out, okay, why did you vote that way? And, they have valid points. Like I was talking to him earlier, like I have a friend who voted for Trump. He's for Trump through and through, but he's a genuinely incredible person. And so you try to find out why is it that they voted that way. And maybe somebody like a Trump supporter might be like, I can't believe that person voted for Hillary. But you might come from like, okay, well, why did you vote for her? And I think that's where the conversation starts.
I've got some major has to continue because there's the conversation has to continue. That's one thing. We can't sweep some of these issues under the rug and just think that magically, all those wounds will be healed. No, the conversation has to continue. I heard some people say that, for example, race relations became worse under President Obama. And in my opinion, that's totally false. I just think that there are more opportunities now to express those views, and maybe the campaign just allowed some extreme, discourse. So we're just discovering more. But the conversation, the bottom line, I think the conversation has to continue, and then at the top level, meaning President Trump, who is the symbolic leader, he's the one who really needs to lead this effort for the healing to happen.
Are the conversations that you guys are having on a day-to-day basis, have they changed?
They've gradually changed. I mean, right after the election, it was absolutely volcanic. People did not want to talk to one another, but I think it's getting better.
I've got a very fundamental problem. I mean, this man mocked a disabled individual. I mean, this man called people murderers and rapists. I mean, this man, he disrespected a Gold Star family member. He picks on people. He acts like a 2-year-old sometimes. So, I've got a fundamental problem when I talk to somebody who has voted for somebody like this. And it is my fault because I cannot understand mocking a disabled individual.
You feel like they endorsed that behavior?
Yes. I've got friends who are disabled. I have friends who have kids who are disabled, and the only thing those parents are thinking of at the moment is what happens when I die. Who takes care of him? And the President of the United States mocked a disabled individual. I have fundamental problems, and I think maybe you guys could tell me that's me. Maybe you could tell me that that's my heart. I don't think it is. I
think in order for the conversation to continue, it's going to take us as Americans ensuring that that extreme rhetoric doesn't become the new normal.
Thank you.
I think we
so.
have to get back to having, civil political discourse where, we may not agree. We may fundamentally disagree on certain issues, but we should be able to, as, fellow citizens, be able to discuss these issues and give, valid reasons why we support or don't agree with certain issues. And so we can't follow, this trend of outbursts on Twitter and just demeaning people at a basic human level.
Here's the thing. Trump talked about, his campaign slogan was "Make America Great Again," right? But he never defined what great looks like. And so everybody is just kind of assuming that they understand what he's talking about. My hope is that he does define that, and it is inclusive, a definition of what greatness looks like. Because if that's the goal that we're all working towards, then show us how we can work together to make America great again. I'm hoping that he moves away from treating it as it's a zero-sum game, that if my vision of making America great, if I win, that means you lose. Like, it shouldn't be that way. It should be, how can we both win? How can we both make America great so it's great for both of us?
Yeah,
He actually did define it. He defined it in the convention speech that he gave, where he appealed back to the founding vision of the country, which is e pluribus unum, liberty, and in God we trust. He knows that those three principles, which are the founding principles of the country, and the principles and the values that have held the country together for over 200 years, and which have been, in a large part, what have made us great, are the things that we need to actually uphold and actually need to instill in ourselves once again. We need to have that spirit of liberty be infused in every single community, regardless of their background, regardless of their origin. We need to look at the concept of e pluribus unum as a defining element that shapes our country. We need to bring all these people from different places and make one country called America. We can't have this self-imposed balkanization that we do to ourselves, where I'm only representing the Asian community, I'm only representing the Muslim community, I'm only representing the Black community.
America is not a soup. America is a bouquet of flowers.
You're right.
That we all have our individuality, we all have our beauty, and together we make it better. We are not a bunch of soup that everybody goes in the pot and loses their identity. So we have to understand that.
That's the thing. No one's
every
asking for
that. Every community has
some people are.
Has unique
some people are, but that's
strengths.
not what America is about. That's not what
every
he's
culture is beautiful. We have to accept that. Every religion is beautiful. Every culture is beautiful. Every ethnic group has something to contribute, and we should not. One of the things which I think people make mistake is assuming that like they say about lately they're saying about Muslim Americans. Are they Americans? Of course I'm American, just like anybody else. Yeah. I happen to be Muslim, and you need to accept that and respect that. Just like I respect somebody who is a Buddhist, or so is a Christian, or is a Jew. I have to respect that. I don't want an America, a society where we all lose our identity because there is something different being an American than being a Muslim American, being a Black American, being an Hispanic American. So I think that is something which we need to.
I think there's a big push to kind of drop the notion of hyphenation, right? That we're just all American, and that means we all love apple pie and baseball, right? And that's not necessarily true. I don't like apple pie, and football's my favorite sport. So, and that's okay, right? No, cherry pie is the way to go. But it's okay. And I think there are a lot, at least, so out of my 7,000 or so Facebook folks who constantly chime in on things, there is an overwhelming preponderance of people pushing the idea that if you do not conform to this box, right, then you should leave America, right? Exactly. When Colin Kaepernick said, you know what, I'm just going to protest quietly. I'm not going to say nothing to nobody. I'm just going to be over here minding my own business. Y'all go forward and do the national anthem like y'all normally do. Everybody was like, you need to leave the country. When people were, I mean, like, it's serious. I mean, and I've said things on Facebook and people are like, well, you should leave. And I'm like, so I can't be unhappy with things that are going on in my country without having to leave the country because I'm unhappy with what's going on in the country. And I think we've gotten to that place where you can't be Hispanic American. You can't be Italian American. You can't be, whatever. There's a growing number of people who think that America is this set of ideals, and if you fall outside of that boundary, you are not American.
Well, I think that's the challenge for Hispanics in this country, is that when you hear the word immigrant, you automatically assume you meet John, he must be an immigrant, undocumented, what have you. And, I am the youngest of 9 children. My parents came here by crossing the Rio Grande from Mexico to the United States. My whole life I've spent here. I was born here. I have a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate. Latinos are all in different categories within that spectrum. And we need to appreciate and respect that and not put all of us in these well-fitted boxes, because we don't fit in the boxes. No. Some of us are in between the lines of those boxes. Absolutely. And so don't look at a Muslim or an African-American person and just automatically assume that they are something. Take that opportunity to find out more about them. And at the end of the day, let's move forward with what will make America the America that we all want it to be. And that's accepting one another, disagreeing, and finding, as you mentioned earlier, so many of you, where can we agree and how can we move that ball forward, and how can we engage those who are not fortunate enough to have a microphone to sit and speak for themselves. That's our responsibility, is to be that voice and to include more people in this conversation.
And my hope is that these conversations happen in every single city in America, and that people are able to speak their mind and come to dialogue and really have that dialogue. Another hope that I have is that we help each other to resist legislation that's not going to make our community safer. It's going to make our communities more unsafe, because people are going to be afraid to approach their local government. I mean, we see that with immigration. People feel that the police is going to ask them for their status. It's not going to make them want to call the police when they're victims or witnesses of a crime. It's going to make them say, no, I don't want to talk to those people.
I don't want to send my children to school because I'm afraid of what's going to happen to them if they do something to me.
And another hope that I have is that we learn our lesson and we become more engaged, and we never, ever let this happen again in the United States, because the government should be representative of its people, and at this moment, it is not.
We're almost out of time. Heba, you were going to, I think, jump in with hopes, and I just wanted to give you a chance to finish that thought.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I was just going to add to what everybody else has been saying and chime in with my hope forward is, also that the conversation keeps going. But one way I think I sort of try and understand the Trump presidency is my hope, and this is not meant to be bleak, but is also that I hope that that this will allow the sort of logical conclusion of problematic rhetoric to be seen and come to fore, and we can forge forward from there. And I mean, that's meant to be positive, but I think that it doesn't sound it. But, I think that all of this, rhetoric and sort of hateful divisiveness that's coming to the center and that's coming out and open, I think my hope is that it'll just get worked out, and that I think the long run will be much better.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you all. This has been a live web stream pre-inauguration broadcast from the Geary Studio at Houston Public Media in conjunction with A Nation Engaged, an initiative from NPR that is looking to spark conversation that matters.
Thanks so much to all of our guests in studio. Thanks to you for coming in. Thanks to you for taking part in the Twitter conversation. You can find this content in this video and share it by going to houstonpublicmedia.org/DiverseCity. And you can learn more about our year-long diversity initiative, which aims to explore what it really means for Houston to be the most diverse city in the nation. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Edel Howlin.
And I'm Sarah McCammon. Thanks for watching, and good night.